Is Donald Trump driving the price of Bitcoin higher? And
they have their own unique strengths, and humor is not shared amongst all. It also allows us to kill other people. Let's say the strategic Bitcoin reserve was hacked and drained. Typically, that doesn't result in B-52s flying over another nation.
Welcome to the Crypto Swamp Creatures, the show you never knew you needed and still don't want anyways. I'm Christopher Alexander, your blockchain and advocacy communications expert.
And I'm Justin Wallin, your guide through the often murky world of politics and polling.
Every week, we dive into the intersection of crypto, policy, and politics without taking sides. We're here to give you the straight, data-driven analysis that influences the decisions of those who want to win or want to be elected.
Think of it as a late 80s newscast, but with a twist. We bring you the serious stuff, but with a dash of sardonic wit and just a hint of irreverence.
So whether you're a crypto enthusiast, a policy wonk, or just someone who appreciates a data-driven approach, this is your place.
We bring you both sides, weigh the impact on crypto, and then we share what we use for show prep every week on our medium.
So remember, no one is as smart as someone who agrees with you, and now get ready to enter the no swamp zone.
welcome to the Crypto Swamp Creatures. We're back on our regular schedule now that I've moved. I'm surrounded by fantastic decor and books showing how erudite I am. By the way, I use the word erudite, so that means I'm definitely smart, as I'm sure Justin would agree. So lots to talk about today. We'll dive right in, but stay tuned to the end. Big question here: is Donald Trump driving the price of Bitcoin higher, and what more can he do to boost the price? All that and more on the Crypto Swamp Creatures. So Justin, let's a ton going on since the election, and let's start with, for all of Trump's, I think, as you say, poetic descriptions of policy outcomes and other things. He tends to keep his promises when it comes to his platform. He did the last time around. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is one of the things about his brand, right? He runs on a platform. He very carefully selects those items in the platform. He beats the drum on that, every one of those items, some would say to death. I would say it's actually message discipline. It's funny because, a lot of us look at what Trump says and are critical of what appears to be off message, right? Because he has a personality, and the personality is big and it involves itself pretty regularly. But if you look at his policy positions in isolation and look at his discussion about them, he is consistent. He's consistent in elections, and he's consistent when he's elected. And I think this bears well for the American people, whether you agree with him or not, in terms of clarity. And it certainly, I believe, potentially bears well in this funny little world in which we're talking.
And, to that, I think he really does view his party platform as something of a business contract that he has to fulfill. I think then what becomes interesting is his programs work even when they don't. And he is very, very clear about that they work regardless of whatever state they're in. So he both does what he says and is sure whatever he did worked every time, all the time. But on the crypto front, he's done a lot of really interesting stuff, and a lot's been going on. So I think maybe you start from the top. No offense to him, I'm not actually starting with his cabinet, but rather the SEC, which has been egregious in its behavior, actually described in the DC Circuit Court as capricious in its pursuit when the ETF refusal to rule was finally struck down. Because keep in mind, they just literally refused to do their job. And that's what really ate up the crypto industry. They said crypto was the worst scam ever. It was a Ponzi scheme, and they didn't want to create rules for it. So it's like the weirdest problem. It's the greatest problem ever that you won't solve. Enter, as we talked with Ken Cuccinelli, the former AG of Virginia. They just walk in and randomly accuse you of a crime. And there's just no standards. That's gone. Chairman Gensler resigns. He's going to go out, I think, on Inauguration Day. The SEC is going to shuffle it. We love Hester Pierce. She writes very colorful opinions, reminiscent of who was the justice that talked about like Nietzschean.
Well, Scalia's opinions were fantastic. Yeah. She's Scalia-ian in
I would call her dissents on decisions Scalia-like. There's another SEC.
On that, we're mentioning this stuff and we're saying that, and I think if people haven't read these decisions, they should, because they are interesting. They actually they have personality, a tremendous amount of personality. They bring in history. They often bring in philosophy. They bring. The people who write good opinions are worth reading, and she writes great opinions.
And I think you make a great point. It sounds like it would be the dullest thing in the world. But think about this for a minute. They have to deal with this dry subject. They want it to be interesting too, many of them. And the best make it readable. And it's entertaining. Hester Pierce writes hilarious stuff. Scalia wrote hilarious stuff. It's funny though, the fun people seem to be more on the conservative side of legal opinions.
It may be that left reading those opinions more often than the others.
Maybe I need to look, but I don't remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg being fun. I remember feisty.
Well, they have their own unique strengths, and humor is not shared amongst all.
Yes, I guess let me rephrase that. You don't see a lot of humor on the left. They've become a very Puritan and dour group these days. But someone prove me wrong. I'm happy to be. It's fine. So at any rate. Two other very interesting picks. And now, of course, I've forgotten his name again because all I can think of is Soros guy and the conspiracy theories. Scott Bassett was George Soros' chief investment officer. I believe that makes him the highest ranking openly gay Treasury official in the history of the country. So obviously, gay-hating Nazis abound appointing gay nominees for Treasury Secretary. But this guy is just really good at what he does. And
he's an operator, right?
He is. And he is a big fan of crypto. So, crypto policy kind of runs in two directions. It's Department of Treasury, and we'll get back to him in Treasury in a second. It's also the SEC, where things are looking up, and the CFTC as well. That's on the commodities side, but I think that's less important this time around with a more friendly SEC. So you have, and by the way, there was another commissioner who has kind of come out as more of a crypto fan than previously, aside from Hester Pierce. I can't remember who it is. We'll have to look it up. And talk a little more about later, but there's a change, a very pro crypto change, and this is really exciting. Clear rules for industry, consumers are protected. Crypto can do its thing, and we'll see where it goes. On the Treasury side, it gets really, really interesting because of course Trump talked about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And you now have a Treasury official who is predisposed to making that happen. So I'm going to ask you this question, Justin. By the way, we were at NABS last week, the North American Blockchain Summit. Had some great discussions, locked in some really interesting people to be guests. Had a discussion with, we'll just call it, it's a state level government official about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So I'm going to ask you a question, Justin, and see if you have an answer, because they sorted it and I still don't. Hey, I love this idea. We have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and Bitcoin only goes up because it's impossible for it to do anything else. And then we're fine. What's your view on that?
The strategic Bitcoin reserve has real challenges that those who advocate for it, and I'm not personally saying I'm either for it or against it, but it has challenges, right? Reserves are typically used for emergency use, right? When we think of reserves, we're thinking of things like oil. And why is oil important? Because one, it allows goods and services to flow back and forth, right? Trucks and trains and things like that. It also allows us to kill other people. So when you need defensive items or offensive items, things that make other things go boom, you need oil and oil byproducts. Oil is pretty much in everything. It is in every aspect of it. I mean, it's, you're wearing your glasses. If I was wearing mine, that's oil. If it's all oil. So if you want the world to continue, and the world is a dangerous place, you keep strategic reserves. Now, the reason why Bitcoin's being floated, I believe, is because strategic reserves has been used as cash accounts, right? Which is different from what they're intended to be. So when the price of oil has gone up, it's been very easy for the executive branch to say, well, we're going to open the spigot on those reserves, and we're going to roll out a few million barrels of oil from some cave somewhere in the middle of the United States, and we're going to ease the tension, which really does very little, except it makes a nice little soundbite. Yeah. But what does Bitcoin do? Until Bitcoin is, and it's kind of, I get it, this is chicken and egg stuff, but until it is a more commonly used platform for commerce or other forms of interaction between business or other large entities, it's going to be hard to see it performing and functioning in a similar fashion as they have in the past. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means right now it's a little puzzling.
And so after my, and God, I hope people figured out it was sarcastic setup. I'll give you the BlackRock argument for holding Bitcoin, because I think it's closer to a government's, and some people may be alarmed by that if they really think through it, but you can do that on your own time. They are now holding the Bitcoin, they've said, as a hedge against the dollar. So one of the ideas, and we'll get to my problem, which is the fact that they're not addressing volatility. But you hold Bitcoin, and if inflation, if there's inflation with the dollar, then you've just preserved essentially US dollars and protected them against inflation so that you can spend them in an emergency. That's argument one. Two is that the price will only ever go up and to the right. And while I truly want to believe that, my bank balance really wants to believe that, or I should say my wallet, my cold wallet wants to believe that. I am a little uncomfortable with a what do we do if it all goes wrong perspective on this, because if the United States government held, and again, to be clear, they're not taking the entire treasury and converting it to Bitcoin and holding it. It's a strategic decision in the actual sense of the word strategic, not the one that's used by Georgetown graduates. That means important. So to them, wrongly, it's a fragment of it's a shard within this kind of armory. But what you would do is you'd hold on to it, and then the price is going to go up and up and up, and it's an investment basically the U.S. government's made. That is, if it gets large enough, that is an amazing target to the Russian or the Chinese. If you could wipe out a bunch of U.S. spending power at the same time you're bringing down the grid or doing a bunch of other things, you would do that in a heartbeat. Proponents of Bitcoin would argue that's very, very difficult to do, which it is. My favorite are the proponents that say Bitcoin will replace governments and there'll be no more war, which is really funny because when Bitcoin's worth enough, there will be a war over it. And anyone who doubts that, I can spend 15 minutes with you and I think you'll understand it. Having said all that, when I challenged someone who's close, be careful how I say this, knows the people who are drafting the legislation well, that would be Senator Loomis. This person sort of, I'll try to stay in a they-them world here to not give away their gender. This person shrugged their shoulders and was like, we'll print more money. And of course, we don't have a printing press that we push go on. It doesn't work that way. There's policy involved. But in a matter of speaking, you can, in fact, enact policy that is equivalent to it.
Sure. So
right now, it's a little Bitcoin maxi. We'll all live in perfect anarchy and just have Bitcoin and no government-y, to me, would be my critique. But the people working on this very well know that. These aren't dumb people. So I think they'll work through it. But
and their approach, Christopher, is really more like looking at it like a part of the basket. You know, gold is an asset. It sits there. They recognize that it's vulnerable, just like the goal that fabled Fort Knox is vulnerable. That's why it was targeted by nukes. Of course, the difference here is that nukes are a very clear act of war, and electronic warfare, hacking, and these sorts of things do not typically. Let's say the strategic Bitcoin reserve was hacked and drained. Typically, that doesn't result in B-52s flying over another nation. So it's a little bit different, right? I mean, sort of. It's a different kind of world.
I will point out, because the maxis, when they hear you say that, are gonna lose their minds. You would, and
I'm trying to make this a little more accessible for the layperson.
No. I'm gonna correct a finer point. Your point overall is dead on. I will just say, and it's funny. I actually found the contract to do this. The Marshals Service contracts with Coinbase, actually, it turns out, to custody the U.S. government's Bitcoin. And so they put it on a cold wallet and they hold it somewhere. So your Fort Knox in this case, like, kind of ironically, I presume it's like a triple lock system where there's like a vault and it sits in it, but there's like a little hard drive in a vault and it's worth a gajillion dollars.
It's literally a piece of hardware that's sitting in a vault somewhere. So it's just like Fort Knox. No. And to access it really would take a physical act of war.
Yeah, but here is something really scary. And this is something I've talked about. I'll go the pretentious route on my many television appearances, which is an electromagnetic pulse.
Right.
The Soviets, as in the Soviets, I'm not misspeaking and saying the Russians, the Soviets developed a man-pack EMP device. And their special operations guys, Spetsnaz, considered that towards the end of the Cold War. And as I recall, one of them's missing.
Oh, that's helpful.
Like they never found it. So I like to think some oligarch has it like in a little like lead shielded chamber and shows it to his friends. That made me feel a little better, but one of them's missing. Maybe they found it. It's been a while since I followed this, but it may have actually been a backpack nuke, not an EMP shield. So I don't know if that makes you feel
even
better.
More comfortable. Yeah.
Dude's just some guy named Yuri's rolling around with a Hiroshima blast size bomb on his back. Cause that's the smallest they could fit in there. But
exactly, and it's a drinking game asset. We go wrestle a bear and then play with the backpack nuke.
Yeah, and sleep tight, by the way. Oh, and by the way, have your protest and tell me the world's ending when there's a missing backpack nuke that can pop off of Hiroshima. Tell me all about how my lawnmower is going to end the planet. But at any rate, the EMP pulse would fry everything. And that one kind of worries me. Perhaps we can EMP shield it. Now we're getting into some deep stuff. At some point, again, it's a spy versus spy game. But that always worries me. That's about in these end of the world scenarios. The only concern, like someone pops off a nuke, you might still be able to drag your sled of gold around. Your hardware is probably going to get fried. The best answer the Bitcoiners have to that is, really, I think I got bigger problems if someone popped off a nuke, and I tend to side with them. Not being an uber survivalist. So it's exactly
right. If we get to that point, there really are a lot of challenges ahead of us, and it's this is the least of the concern.
Your digital treasury may not be the top of your worries, and someone's probably coming for your gold. So and you're not going to like what they do to get it. But anyways, lest we wax apocalyptic, curious your thoughts here. A ton has gone on politically. The price of Bitcoin has spiked. There's optimism across the board, whether it's from venture capital to stocks, from new investments within companies in capital to Bitcoin. There's a lot of optimism. Bitcoin has clearly benefited from that. What do you think are some examples that could bring Bitcoin up again between now and inauguration?
First, some clarity. They're appointing people, and that's step one. But to give some clarity around potential policy would be helpful, and that so far hasn't really been elucidated. The association, the Crypto Association, wrote a letter and communicated it to or presentation, I think it was, and communicated it to the transition team. which, by the way, nicely done in terms of being concise. It had 5 asks, I believe. It's laid those out carefully. I think they're doing that at the right time before everyone gets seated. They should have been doing it, and I believe they have been doing it during and pre-election. Of course, you want to actually be lobbying everybody who's running, and I'm sure they were doing that as well. But hats off to them for keeping things concise and not kind of wearing their favorite everything. That clarity, if any one of these appointees says something along those lines, even one of those platforms that they laid out or asks that they laid out, we're going to see things just explode. And aside from that, I don't see too much other than the usual kind of forces of optimism that will really change things. That's my bet. That's the big one that I'm waiting for. Someone really willing to say this is actually what we're going to do and lay out some framework. If they do that, it'll change the entire universe.
And I think they basically are trying to set the agenda for one other thing that we didn't mention, which is the creation of a crypto council as part of the NEC. That is a big deal. That basically that subcommittee is it reports as part of the NEC directly to the president, and President Trump is all about the economy. So the NEC is going to have, I think, an outsized role compared to in the previous administration. I think the previous administration heavily focused within government on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that and that became an underpinning for just about everything government agencies pursued. It was like a lens that things were looked through. I think for the Trump administration, they are going to be about a booming economy. And if what you're doing doesn't help the economy, I don't think they want to hear it. So if you are in a government agency outside of defense, even to some extent within defense and intelligence, that doesn't improve the economy, I think you might want to start dropping your resume places, because they're bringing a meat cleaver to those agencies. And I think that's something we can talk about another time. It's really interesting. So for this segment, will Donald Trump drive the price of Bitcoin up? I think it's possible. By the way, I'm guessing I'll go on record, if we're pretentious enough to say this is the record of anything, and say I think you're going to see some more ups and downs. Maybe I think Bitcoin probably breaks 100,000 before the end of the year, and then I think what you're going to see is some profit taking sometime towards the last 2 weeks, a dip down, and then coming in January, I think you're going to have a lot of buzz up to inauguration about Bitcoin, and I think you'll see a new high by the 20th, which is of course Inauguration Day, and maybe sometime after. So that's going to be my guess. All right, well, thanks for watching, and we look forward to the next episode.
And that's all for this week on the Crypto Swamp Creatures.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the intersection of crypto, politics, and policy.
Remember, the data doesn't lie, and neither do we. Well, not about anything important anyways.
Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay out of the swamp.